Wendy Taylor stands in line at a Missouri food pantry every Monday morning, waiting for the doors to open. She works full-time at an Amazon warehouse, making $18 an hour. A wage that sounds reasonable until you realize her husband's heart attack forced him to stop working, and their bills don't care about sounding reasonable. The 18 an hour Amazon pays me is not enough to cover our bills, she told reporters at a July rally. That's why I'm fighting for a union. Here's what makes Taylor's situation particularly American in 2025. She works for a company worth hundreds of billions of dollars that recorded nearly $44 billion in revenue last year, yet she can't afford groceries without charitable assistance. This isn't an anomaly. It's the system working exactly as designed. A design that just survived the most aggressive legal assault on corporate concentration in 40 years and emerged largely unscathed. Between August and October 2025, federal courts ordered over $5 billion in fines against tech giants. 800,000 California gig workers gained the right to unionize. Prosecutors pursued cases alleging algorithmic price fixing that pushed rents higher across American cities. The headlines suggested a reckoning was finally arriving for the monopolies that dominate everything from the apps on your phone to the food in your grocery store. Then, September happened. Judge Amit Mehta, the same judge who ruled in August 2024 that Google illegally monopolized search, issued his remedy decision. Reformers had pushed for splitting up the company, forcing Google to sell Chrome or Android to truly open the market. Instead, Meta banned exclusive contracts and mandated some data sharing while explicitly calling divestitures disproportionate. He admitted he was gazing into a crystal ball about how markets would evolve and chose caution over disruption. Alphabet's stock jumped 8%. Analysts called it almost a best-case scenario for Google. More significantly, legal experts immediately recognized that Meta had set such rigorous standards for structural breakups that future courts would find them nearly impossible to justify. The neo-Brandesian dream of actually dismantling tech giants, the movement that animated progressive antitrust policy since 2021, effectively died that day in September. This matters because the alternative to breaking up monopolies is regulating their behavior, and behavioral remedies have a miserable track record. Microsoft agreed to behavioral constraints in 2001 after losing its antitrust trial. Those remedies did nothing to prevent the company from leveraging its Windows dominance into cloud computing supremacy. Microsoft is now worth over $3 trillion and controls massive chunks of enterprise computing, cloud infrastructure, and through its investment in OpenAI, artificial intelligence development. The behavioral remedies worked great if you were a Microsoft shareholder. Yet courts keep choosing them anyway because structural remedies feel too dramatic, too interventionist, too likely to cause unintended consequences. So we get conduct requirements and data sharing mandates and prohibitions on specific contractual terms. Companies hire compliance officers, file regular reports, and continue doing fundamentally the same business in slightly adjusted ways. Profits keep growing. Market concentration keeps increasing, and workers like Wendy Taylor keep choosing between paying rent and buying groceries. The numbers tell a story that should be causing alarm. 7 tech companies now control over a third of the entire stock market, more concentrated than even the dot-com bubble. Corporate profit margins keep hitting highs, while your real wages haven't recovered to where they stood 4 years ago. For over 2 years straight, prices rose faster than paychecks. Economist Thomas Philippon calculated what this costs. Reduced competition compared to 40 years ago extracts roughly $5,000 annually from the average household. That's not a tax you see on any receipt. It's the invisible toll extracted when markets stop working. It's what happens when 4 companies control most beef processing and can therefore set prices with minimal concern for what farmers or consumers want. It's what occurs when hospital systems consolidate and Medicare suddenly pays thousands more per doctor who joins the system, simply because the same procedure gets billed at hospital rates instead of independent practice rates. The European Union decided it had seen enough of this pattern and actually did something about it. Brussels hit Google with a massive fine in September for abusive advertising technology practices, the largest EU antitrust penalty of 2025. The investigation concluded that Google gave its own AdX exchange informational advantages in auctions run by its own tools, a self-dealing arrangement that squeezed competitors and advertisers alike. A few weeks later in April, the EU fined Apple and Meta hundreds of millions for Digital Markets Act violations, with more enforcement actions queued behind them. American courts, by contrast, seem unable to imagine remedies that fundamentally change market structures. Amazon paid $2.5 billion in September to settle Federal Trade Commission charges over Prime subscription tricks that internal emails called "a bit of a shady world" and "an unspoken cancer." The company essentially paid its way out of broader monopolization charges that would have gone to trial in 2027, avoiding questions about whether its dominance across retail, cloud computing, and logistics creates insurmountable barriers to competition. This pattern repeated across cases. Apple in October saw a federal judge decertify a major class action over App Store commissions after finding alarming errors in the damages model, though the same judge found Apple willfully violated her earlier injunction by creating workarounds to avoid allowing external payment systems. She referred Apple and one executive to federal prosecutors for possible criminal contempt, but criminal prosecution of corporate executives for antitrust violations remains vanishingly rare in modern America. Meta's trial over its Instagram and WhatsApp acquisitions proceeds toward a late 2025 or early 2026 decision, with internal emails showing Mark Zuckerberg in 2012 calling Instagram "really scary" as a competitive threat. Yet forcing divestiture of acquisitions completed over a decade ago would be unprecedented, and courts have shown little appetite for unprecedented remedies. The enforcement apparatus itself is transforming in ways that favor continued consolidation. The October 1st federal government shutdown closed the FTC entirely, except for limited filing hours, and severely disrupted Justice Department operations. More significantly, the leadership that drove aggressive antitrust enforcement for 4 years is departing. Andrew Ferguson replaced Lena Khan as FTC chair in January 2025, immediately signaling a philosophical shift from categorical rules to case-specific approaches. Gail Slater, nominated to lead the Justice Department's Antitrust Division, promises a scalpel rather than the sledgehammer approach of her predecessors. What this means in practice became visible when the FTC in September dismissed its appeal of the blocked nationwide non-compete ban, but simultaneously challenged gateway services for imposing 12-month non-competes on pet cremation workers. The message: targeted enforcement against egregious cases, not sweeping regulation of entire practices. Ferguson called his predecessor's approach an assault on the American way of life, language that signals how dramatically the pendulum has swung. Meanwhile, dealmakers are preparing the greatest consolidation wave in corporate history. Goldman Sachs predicts global merger and acquisition activity will hit nearly $4 trillion in 2026, which would surpass the 2021 record. Three forces converge: over $1 trillion in private equity dry powder demanding deployment, declining interest rates as the Federal Reserve cuts toward an expected 3% by mid-2026, and massive artificial intelligence infrastructure spending driving strategic acquisitions. September brought a blitz of mega deals: Saudi money flowing into gaming companies, SpaceX grabbing spectrum assets, pharma giants desperately buying anything with a promising drug pipeline. The pharmaceutical sector faces a super patent cliff as blockbuster drugs lose patent protection, putting hundreds of billions at risk and triggering desperate merger activity. Healthcare consolidation continues relentlessly, with the vast majority of healthcare CEOs who just completed major acquisitions already planning their next deals. One prediction circulating among industry analysts: nearly every community hospital will be affiliated with an integrated healthcare system or discussing affiliation within 3 to 4 years. Technology sector deal value surged over 170% year-over-year in September. Agricultural concentration has already reached crisis levels. 4 companies control the vast majority of beef processing, soybean processing, and pork processing. Kenneth Graves, a 71-year-old retired Arkansas rice grower, interrupted harvest season in September to convene over 400 farmers at a church because the situation had become desperate. "I've never seen this kind of look in farmers' eyes," he said. "It's fear. and it's based in undeniable facts. The facts driving that fear. Farmers now keep just 14 cents of every dollar you spend on food. The rest flows to the handful of corporations controlling processing. America has lost half its farms since 1980, and that loss is accelerating. Over 140,000 farmers gone in just 5 years. The agricultural trade deficit is projected to reach record levels in 2025. When farmers gathered at that church, they weren't there to complain. They were there because family farms are disappearing and nobody seems to care. Workers are organizing against these trends despite facing headwinds. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation in October, allowing over 800,000 rideshare drivers to unionize, making California the second state after Massachusetts to permit gig worker collective bargaining. The victory came paired with another bill cutting Uber and Lyft insurance requirements and saving the companies hundreds of millions, revealing the political horse trading required to secure labor rights. Hector Lopez, a 60-year-old Bay Area Lyft driver working 7 days per week since 2015, has watched his wages decline while receiving no sick pay and relying on Medicaid for health care. He hopes unionization will change something, though Uber and Lyft have spent years perfecting their ability to undermine driver organizing while maintaining their simply technology platforms rather than employers. Uber recorded massive revenue growth last year, while driver earnings per week declined. The gap between corporate profits and driver wages keeps widening. Amazon workers escalated their campaigns despite the company refusing to bargain for 3 years since workers at a Staten Island warehouse voted to unionize. The July Prime Day rally featured workers like Adrian Easterling, an inventory picker who suffered heat stroke because Amazon's air conditioning proved inadequate during a heat wave. Amazon is a multi-trillion-dollar company, he said, after paying his own medical bills when the company only covered his missed shift. They should be providing us with water and proper AC. Amazon recorded nearly 40,000 worker injuries in 2022, almost twice the rate at non-Amazon warehouses, with most facilities exceeding industry injury averages, according to an October 2025 Senate committee report. The technology sector's layoffs accelerated even as profits soared. Companies eliminated nearly 500 tech jobs every single day through October. Intel cutting tens of thousands, Microsoft doing the same, Meta shedding AI roles despite swimming in AI profits. The justification? Artificial intelligence can do the work cheaper. Salesforce eliminated 4,000 customer support roles in September, claiming AI handles half the work. Yet if AI truly replaces that much labor, you might expect prices to fall or service to improve. Instead, profit margins reached 6-quarter highs, while automated support systems proliferated and customer complaints mounted. This brings us to the competition question that will define the next decade. Who controls artificial intelligence development? 10 or 15 years from now, we'll realize it was all about who's going to control artificial intelligence, warned Tim Wu, the legal scholar who coined the term net neutrality. The past 90 days saw AI competition concerns escalate from theoretical to urgent. Microsoft invested over $13 billion in OpenAI while maintaining complex revenue sharing and control provisions. Google partnered with Anthropic. Amazon struck its own Anthropic deal. The FTC issued a scathing report documenting how these partnerships feature arrangements that may impact access to computing resources and increase switching costs for startups trying to compete. NVIDIA's lobbying spending doubled in the third quarter of 2025 as the company recognized its chip dominance creates both competitive advantages and regulatory vulnerabilities. The Justice Department filed a landmark algorithmic collusion case alleging RealPage's rental pricing software enabled illegal coordination among landlords by sharing sensitive competitive data. 2 major landlords already settled and agreed to stop using RealPage's system. If prosecutors prevail, the case establishes a template. Using pricing algorithms that incorporate competitor data becomes illegal, even if no humans explicitly agreed to fix prices. The international enforcement divergence creates its own dynamics. While American courts rejected Google breakups, European regulators in October issued preliminary findings that TikTok and Meta violated transparency obligations by systematically blocking academic researchers from studying how algorithms expose minors to illegal content. The UK's newly operational digital markets law designated Apple and Google as having special status in mobile platforms on October 22nd, imposing tailored conduct requirements. China enacted updated competition law in October and announced NVIDIA violated antitrust regulations during U.S.-China trade negotiations, a move legal experts interpreted as retaliation or leverage rather than pure competitive enforcement. So where does this leave us heading into 2026? Three major case decisions will arrive by April. Google's advertising technology remedies are expected before January 20th, with most legal experts predicting the government prevails on structural relief. Apple faces a motion to dismiss ruling in the first quarter. With roughly even odds, the weakest claims get thrown out while stronger theories proceed to trial in February. Meta's Instagram and WhatsApp trial begins April 14th, with the case enjoying rare bipartisan support. Even former Republican FTC Chair Joseph Simons backs forcing divestiture if the government proves Meta acquired Instagram specifically to eliminate a competitive threat. The predicted merger surge could still derail if tariff escalation creates economic chaos. If the tech stock correction that many analysts see as inevitable finally arrives, or if credit markets tighten and make the leverage underpinning private equity's massive dry powder unavailable. But absent those shocks, the consolidation wave will roll forward because the incentives all point toward more mergers, not fewer. Political dynamics favor rhetoric over action. The 2026 midterm elections loom, with Trump's approval underwater and less than a third of Americans believing they'll be better off a year from now. Both parties will deploy populist anti-monopoly messaging because corporate power makes a safe target. But the Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act faces terrible odds according to congressional tracking sites despite bipartisan sponsorship, because neither party actually wants to constrain the corporations funding their campaigns. State-level enforcement will accelerate to compensate for federal pullback. Dozens of states participate in agricultural competition partnerships. State attorneys general gained venue selection powers, enabling strategic court choices. But state resources can't match federal enforcement capacity, and companies excel at playing states against each other through strategic placement of facilities and jobs. Labor organizing faces similar headwinds. Trump administration appointments to the National Labor Relations Board will reverse Biden-era precedents that favored organizing. Yet the United Auto Workers committed tens of millions to organize non-union auto and battery plants through 2026. The Teamsters added 50,000 members in 2 years and deployed millions toward Amazon organizing. The contradictions create unpredictable outcomes. A major Amazon warehouse could unionize and trigger dominoes, or the organizing wave could crash against determined opposition. The $5 billion in fines assessed against Google, Amazon, Meta, and Apple these past 90 days represents a rounding error for companies worth trillions. The 800,000 California gig workers gaining union rights matters tremendously to those workers but barely dents platform market power. The nearly 200,000 tech workers laid off disappear from corporate balance sheets while profit margins hit 6-quarter highs. What persists is the fundamental bargain that allowed a handful of companies to control ever larger shares of the economy. That bargain depends on network effects, switching costs, and data moats that courts proved unwilling to dismantle. It relies on behavioral remedies that sound tough, but leave business models intact. It counts on enforcement transitions that replace aggressive regulators with case-specific approaches. And it banks on the political system's inability to pass meaningful structural reform because corporate lobbying dollars drown out worker and consumer interests. Wendy Taylor will likely still be standing in that Missouri food pantry line come April 2026, waiting for the doors to open on Monday mornings. Her Amazon paycheck will cover about the same share of her bills. The company's market cap will probably be higher. And the question won't be whether monopolies are making the economy worse. The data on that question is conclusive. The question will be whether anyone with power cares enough to actually do something about it, or whether we've decided that this is simply what American capitalism looks like now. The answer to that question determines whether your children will have meaningful choices about where to work, what to buy, and how to live, or whether those decisions will increasingly be made by a shrinking circle of corporations facing less real competition each passing year.